I was 4, maybe 4.5, when my mother put me in my sister's old yellow dress on a Sunday morning in late October. The light through the kitchen window was the color of weak tea, and the radiators had not yet warmed up. My sister Jenny was 5 years older and had outgrown it, or at least that was the reason my mother gave as she lifted me onto the bathroom counter and began to slip it over my head. I can still feel the cool cotton falling against my bare shoulders. I can still feel the way she knelt to fuss with the hem, her face level with my stomach, talking to me in that low, sing-song voice she used on Jenny when she did her hair. I don't remember being confused by the dress itself. I remember being surprised by how right it felt. That sounds dramatic. It wasn't. It was a small, private feeling, the way a particular food tastes like safety, or the way your grandmother's house smells like your childhood. The dress smelled like my sister's dresser drawer. It had a small green stain near the pocket where Jenny had once tried to color the fabric with a marker, and I stood on the bathroom mat and looked down at my feet in the mirror and felt something I would not have a word for until I was 32. My mother's name was Catherine, but everyone called her Cat. My father was a quieter man named Stephen, a math teacher at the high school 2 towns over, the kind of father who measured his affection in practical gestures, in folded laundry and packed lunches, and the careful way he laid out our shoes by the door at night, so no one would trip in the dark. He had a soft gray mustache that I used to brush with my fingers on Sunday nights when I sat on his lap and watched whatever documentary was on PBS. Jenny had her hands always in something, pencils or crossword puzzles or baby frogs she was determined to rescue from the downspout. My grandparents lived 40 minutes away in a brick house that smelled like coffee and old books, and we visited every other weekend, and my grandmother would take my chin in her hand and tell me I was getting taller, as if it were a small miracle she had personally witnessed. I didn't wear the dress out of the house, and I didn't wear it again. My mother said I had grown out of it in a week, which wasn't true. She put it back in Jenny's drawer because she didn't have anywhere else to put it. I watched the yellow dress for the rest of the fall the way you might watch a door you'd been told you couldn't open, and I didn't speak of it to anyone. I was 4. I had no vocabulary for this. I had no concept of myself as someone who might want anything at all. In 2nd grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Hewitt who had a wooden ruler and a cough that sounded like a small engine, and she lined the boys up one day in October to give us haircuts for the school picture. There was no salon in our town, no proper barber for children, and Mrs. Hewitt had a pair of clippers she kept in a yogurt container on her desk, and she would buzz the boys' hair herself on picture day, just enough to even it out, standing us one by one on an overturned crate in the back of the classroom. The other boys talked about their haircuts afterward the way old men talk about weather, comparing length and neatness with a kind of resigned pride. When my turn came, I sat on the crate and felt the clippers against the back of my neck, and felt almost nothing at all. I had not yet learned to hold an opinion about my own appearance. I had not yet learned that I was allowed to. The haircut did not bother me. What bothered me, years later when I thought about it for the first time, was the photograph Mrs. Hewitt sent home that November. I was sitting on the steps of the school in a blue polo shirt my mother had bought at Sears, and my hair was short in the back and uneven in the front, and I was smiling the cautious smile of a child who has been told to smile. Jenny pinned the photo to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a frog, and my father looked at it over his coffee the next morning and said I looked like a little man. He meant it as a compliment. I remember feeling, for the first time in my life, that a compliment could be something to survive. I did not know why my father's words landed on me like that. I did not have the language. I knew only that when he said you look like a little man, I felt the photograph in my chest become something I did not want to be. That was the first small wrongness. I didn't have a name for it then, and I didn't carry it around during the day. I carried it the way children carry small injuries, invisibly, in the muscle of the shoulder or the bend of the knee, the things that show up only when you sit still long enough to feel them. In 3rd grade, I borrowed a hair clip from a girl at recess named Abigail McAllister. She had a small silver clip with no decoration, the kind older sisters wear, and she let me try it because I had asked, and I asked because I had seen Jenny wear one. She slid it into the hair above my left ear and went back to talking to someone else, and I walked around the edge of the playground for an hour with the clip in my hair, and I felt nothing in particular, and I returned it before the bell rang, and I did not think about it again for 15 years. I am telling you about it now because everything small was a hint, and only in the looking back do the hints line up into anything that looks like a path. When I was 9, my grandmother gave me a navy sweater with a snowflake pattern across the chest. She had knitted it herself. It was a little too large because she was already knitting for the next winter even though it was only November, and when I put it on at her kitchen table it came down past my hips and the sleeves fell over my hands. My grandmother was so proud of it, she made me wear it the rest of the weekend. I wore it to breakfast and to the television and to bed, and on Sunday morning she took a Polaroid of me in it and taped it to the inside of the door that led to her back porch. I remember feeling, in that sweater, the same neutral feeling I had felt years earlier in the yellow dress, the small absence of wrongness. I remember thinking, partly as a joke with myself, partly as something more serious than I could have explained, that the sweater didn't have a boy version and a girl version. It just had a version. I wore it for years. I wore it until the elbows went through. My father taught me to shave when I was 12. He stood behind me in the bathroom with a can of foam and a pink disposable razor, and he showed me how to angle the blade, how to rinse it, how to pat my face dry after. I remember the smell of the foam, which was the smell of my father's Sunday mornings as far back as I could remember, and I remember the sound of his voice telling me to go with the grain. He was patient. He was proud of me that morning in a way he almost never was, the kind of quiet pride he kept folded up like one of his laundry squares. I shaved 2 or 3 times that month, and then I stopped, not because I disliked it but because there was nothing there to shave. I told my father there was nothing there to shave, and he said in a few months there would be. I nodded and put the razor back in the medicine cabinet in its little pink wrapper, and from that day forward, every time I passed the bathroom I felt a small, quiet impersonation begin in my shoulders, as if I were wearing something I had not chosen. I was 13 when my cousin Marcus came to stay for 2 weeks in July. He was 15 and he laughed too loudly, and he used my father's workshop to build a small wooden box he intended to gift his girlfriend, and he wore the same blue t-shirt 3 days in a row, and at night he and my father sat on the porch and talked about sports, and I sat on the top step and listened. There was a moment, halfway through his visit, when he came into my room late at night, and I was not yet asleep, and he sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and asked me how things were going. He was trying, I think, to be a kind of older brother figure because his own younger brother had just left for college and my aunt had told him to check on me. I said things were fine. I didn't know what things meant. He said, "You ever wonder who you are?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't joking. He went on, careful and low, about how he sometimes wondered who Marcus was, whether the Marcus his friends knew was the Marcus his mother knew, whether he could be both at once. He was 15 and he was half asleep and he had no idea what he was opening up in me. I lay in the dark after he went back to the guest room and thought about who I was, and I realized I had no Marcus to be and no Marcus not to be. I had nothing. I just had the small discomfort of being a boy in a house full of people who expected me to be a boy. The discomfort is the wrong word. It wasn't large enough to be called discomfort. It was the quiet awareness of being watched, of being a boy in a way that registered to others at the same time as it failed to register to me. It was the strange feeling of wearing shoes that everyone agreed were the right size, but that I could feel slipping at the heel. I don't remember being sad about it. I remember being puzzled. I remember being puzzled for years. Puberty, when it came, was the kind of puberty that happens to quiet boys. I grew taller. My voice changed. I started to need the razor more than once a month, though I still didn't like to use it. My shoulders broadened slightly. I went from looking like my sister to looking like my father at the same age that my father had begun to look like my grandfather. People started to call me sir. A man at the grocery store called me sir in line when I was 14, and I had to be told to respond. I remember the small panic of being addressed as a grown man while still being a child, but underneath that panic was a different one, older, more patient, a panic about being addressed as a man at all. I didn't understand it. I told myself I was shy. In high school, I learned the skill of being unnoticed. I joined no clubs. I tried out for no teams. I had 2 or 3 friends, all of them louder than I was, all of them happier than I was, all of them more certain than I was. I went to my classes and I came home and I sat in my room and listened to the Radiolab podcast my father had started playing in the kitchen, and I drew small invented dresses in the margins of my notebooks. I did not think of them as dresses. I thought of them as designs. I did not think of them as designs for myself. I thought of them as designs for an abstract figure, a person who did not yet have a face. I came home one day in 11th grade and found my mother on the porch with a cup of tea and a copy of a magazine she had been reading, and she said to me, without preamble, that she had been thinking about a coat for me for winter. She described it in detail. It was navy, and it had a particular collar she had seen in a catalog, and she thought it would suit me. I said, all right. She said she had also seen in the same catalog a wool coat in burgundy that she thought would suit me better. She said she had placed an order for the burgundy because she liked the way burgundy would look against my coloring. I sat down on the porch step and listened and felt something I couldn't name. My mother was choosing the coat I would wear into winter, and I was letting her, and I felt a strange comfort in letting her, and I felt a stranger unease in the comfort. The coat arrived in November. It fit well. I wore it every day. I felt, when I wore it, that my mother had dressed me in something she had chosen for me, the way she had chosen the yellow dress 9 years earlier, and I felt, without knowing I felt it, that this was closer to right. I went to college in a city an hour and a half away, and I lived in a dorm with 2 boys who were louder and more confident than I was, and I went to class and I made friends slowly, and I dated no one. I told my parents I was focusing on school. I told myself I was shy. I told myself a lot of things. In my second year, I took a course on the history of fashion because it fit my schedule and I had heard the professor was gentle. The course was about the social meaning of clothing, and at the end of January we had a guest lecture from a poet who had published a small, beautiful book about wearing her mother's wedding dress in an empty church on her 30th birthday, and the poet stood at the front of the lecture hall in a plain black sweater and described, for 40 minutes, the experience of putting on a piece of clothing that belonged to someone else and feeling, in that piece of clothing, that she was closer to herself than she had ever been. I sat in the 3rd row, and I did not take notes. I sat in the 3rd row, and I felt my entire adolescence open a small door inside my chest. I did not cry. I did not have any visible reaction. I sat very still for the rest of the lecture, and after the lecture I walked back to my dorm in the cold, and I did not speak to anyone for 3 days. When I spoke again, I asked my roommate to pass the salt. I went home that spring, and my mother was in the kitchen, and I said, in the tone of someone asking about the weather, that I had liked the course on fashion. She said she was glad. I said I had read a book about someone wearing her mother's wedding dress. She said that sounded interesting. She did not ask why I was telling her. I did not tell her why I was telling her. I went upstairs and lay on my bed and felt, for the first time, the smallest beginning of an idea I could have lived with. I could not yet say what the idea was. I did not yet need to. I graduated in May, and I came home, and I worked for a year as an assistant at a small accounting firm in the next town over, and I lived in my old bedroom in my parents' house, and I drove my father's old station wagon, and I ate dinner with my mother every night. My father had begun in those years to take longer walks on Sundays, walks he called thinking walks, and he would come home smelling of cold air and pine, and he would put a hand on my shoulder as he passed through the kitchen and say nothing, and the hand on the shoulder was its own sentence, the way my father's hands always were. Jenny was living in the city by then, working at a newspaper, calling my mother on Wednesdays, calling me once a month to ask if I was okay. I told her I was okay. I was not sure whether I was okay. I was not sure what okay meant. In those years I bought, on small errands, things I did not know how to explain. I bought a small bar of soap at a pharmacy, whose smell I liked. I bought a cardigan at a thrift store, because I wanted a cardigan. I bought a long-sleeved cotton shirt in a deep green at a store in town because it was the color of river water in October. I did not wear any of these things out of the house. I tried them on in my room, in front of the long mirror my parents had bought me for college dorm move-in, and I stood in front of the mirror and watched myself and felt, in the cardigan and the green shirt, the same neutral feeling, the same small absence of wrongness, the same private quiet. I would change back into my ordinary clothes and put the cardigan back in the box and put the box on the top shelf of the closet, and I would not think about it again until the next errand, the next quiet Saturday in town. I was 24 when I met Sarah. She was the new librarian at our small public library, and I had gone in to return a book my mother had lent me, and Sarah was behind the desk scanning it, and she looked up at me and said, in a voice so plain and kind that I did not know what to do with it, that my mother had been in the previous week and mentioned me, and that my mother had spoken about me with a kind of quiet pride that my mother had apparently never expressed to me. I wanted to ask her what my mother had said, but I didn't. I said thank you. I went home and I told my mother that the new librarian was kind, and my mother said she liked her too, and that was that for a few months. I went back to the library. I went back often. I read in the back room where the windows were big and the chairs were old, and I read slowly, and Sarah brought me books she thought I would like. She did not flirt. She was simply attentive in a way I had no defenses against. By February, I was asking her to take a walk after her shift, and by March she had said yes, and on the third Sunday of March we walked along the river where the ice was just beginning to thin, and she told me she had grown up in a house where no one talked, and she had spent most of her childhood trying to imagine what other people's homes sounded like from the outside. I told her my home talked plenty. She laughed. I did not laugh, but I felt, looking at her laugh, something that I had not felt for any of the louder, happier people I had known in school. I felt safe. I did not yet know how important that word was going to become. We dated through the spring and summer. We were married the following May in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard, with the apple tree in bloom and my grandmother holding my mother's arm because her knees had begun to trouble her, and my father standing at the end of the aisle in a gray suit he had owned since college. Jenny flew in from the city and wore a dress the color of honey and cried through the vows in a way that was both embarrassing and a relief to see. Sarah wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with 3 small buttons at the wrist that she had sewn in each night the week before, and she was, as she walked toward me, the calmest, most certain presence I had ever stood next to. We moved into a small house a mile outside of town, a house my father had helped me find, with a kitchen that caught the morning light and a single bedroom on the second floor that smelled faintly of cedar from the closets. Sarah had a way of making a house into a home that felt almost involuntary, almost as if it was something her hands did without consulting her, and within a month she had put small framed photographs on the bookshelves and a wool rug in the hallway that her mother had given her, and the house felt, when I came home from work, less like an address and more like an answer. In those first years of marriage, I was still the person I had been in my parents' house, quiet, careful, almost invisible. I worked. I came home. I ate dinner. I put away the laundry Sarah had folded. I watched her read in the chair by the window on Sunday mornings while the radiator clicked and the light came in. I loved her with the kind of love that does not announce itself, the kind that lives in the small unspoken agreements, in who gets up to close the window when it rains, in who remembers to buy the oat milk, in who knows, without being told, that the other one has had a hard week. I loved her. I loved her more than I had ever loved anything, and I was unable in those years to tell her the rest of what I had been carrying since I was 4 years old and barefoot on a bathroom mat. The first time Sarah noticed anything was on a Tuesday in October. We had been married 2 years. I had come home from a long day at work, and I had stood in the kitchen and watched Sarah put a roast in the oven, and I had said, in a voice that surprised even me, that the cardigan I was wearing had been mine since college. Sarah said she knew. She said she liked it. I said I had a few things like that. She said, all right. She did not ask what things. She did not ask where they were. She stood by the oven with a small towel in her hand and waited, and the waiting was so unhurried that it felt like a kind of permission to keep going. I kept going. I told her after a minute that I had bought a green cotton shirt I liked. She said she would like to see it. I went upstairs and brought it down, still in its tissue paper, and she unfolded it and held it up against her front and said she liked the color and would I like to wear it to dinner. I said I might. She said then she would not look, and she turned back to the oven, and I went upstairs and changed, and when I came down I sat at the kitchen table in the green shirt and felt, immediately, the small absence of wrongness I had first felt at 4 in a yellow dress, and I felt, watching Sarah not look, that I had been handed a room in which I could breathe. I wore the green shirt to dinner every night for the rest of that week, and on Saturday morning Sarah said, in the tone of someone mentioning the weather, that there was a small shop downtown she thought I might like, and she had noticed it on a walk. She said it sold house robes and old scarves and second-hand coats, and she said she had been in once, and the woman behind the counter was kind. I said I would go. I went that afternoon. The shop was a two-room place with low ceilings and a bell on the door, and the woman behind the counter was in her 60s, with silver hair and small reading glasses on a chain, and she did not ask me what I was looking for. She said good afternoon, and went back to her knitting. I looked at the racks. I touched a scarf of pale yellow wool, and put it back. I touched it again, and bought it. I touched a long-sleeved shirt in midnight blue, and bought it. The woman wrapped both in brown paper and said, as I was leaving, that the blue was a beautiful color. I said thank you. I went home. Sarah was on the porch, with a cup of tea. She saw the brown paper bag, and she said nothing. We sat on the porch that afternoon, and I held the yellow scarf in my lap, and I did not unfold it, and Sarah did not ask me to, and the afternoon went on, gentle and quiet, and I felt, sitting there, more held than I had ever felt in my life. The next months were slow. I want to be careful here about how slow, because the slow was the most important part, and the slow is also the part that is hardest to put into words. I would come home from work on Fridays, and I would change into the blue shirt before dinner. I would put on the yellow scarf when I sat by the window on Saturday mornings. I would, on Sundays when Sarah was out for her walk with her sister, sit in the chair in our bedroom and try on, very carefully and alone, a long-sleeved cotton blouse I had bought at the same shop, in a soft cream color, with buttons down the front. I would not wear the blouse out of the house. I would sit in the chair wearing it, and I would feel the same small neutral feeling, the same private quiet, and I would change back into my ordinary shirt before I heard Sarah's key in the door. I did not think of this as anything. I thought of it as a small private comfort, like a favored mug, like a chair by a particular window. I did not think of it as identity. I did not think of it as transformation. I did not think of it as anything that had a name. Sarah saw the blouse one Tuesday in March. I had been careless that day. I had been distracted. I had come downstairs in the cream blouse and had reached for the kettle before I remembered to change, and Sarah was already in the kitchen, and she looked at me the way a person looks at someone they have never seen before, with the same slow attention, the same unhurried waiting, as the afternoon with the brown paper bag. She did not say anything. She said, after a moment, that the kettle was ready, and went back to pouring. I stood at the counter for a moment in the cream blouse and felt the room not collapsing around me, and felt Sarah not asking anything, and felt, for the first time in 30 years, that I was standing in front of another human being wearing something that meant something, and the human being was not flinching and the room was still the room. After dinner that night I sat in the chair by the window, and I told Sarah for the first time in my life, in my own voice, that there were certain clothes that felt closer to me than other clothes, and that I had felt this way since I was a child, and that I did not know what it meant, and that I was telling her because I did not want to carry it by myself anymore. Sarah sat across from me in her chair, and she did not move. She did not ask what kind of clothes. She did not ask since when. She did not say anything for a long time, and her not saying anything was not a silence that demanded my defending what I had said, but a silence that held it, the way a hand holds a glass without gripping it. After a while she said, and her voice was the calmest voice I had ever heard her use, that she had known something was there for a long time, and that she had not asked because she had wanted me to come to it on my own. She said she was glad I had come to it. She said she loved me. She said nothing else for the rest of the night, and we went to bed the way we always did. And in the morning she made coffee and we sat in the kitchen, and the morning was ordinary, and the morning was also the morning on which my life, as I had understood it, had quietly ended. In the months after that I began to tell her small things, one at a time, in the small hours of the evening when the house was quiet. I told her about the yellow dress. I told her about my grandmother's sweater. I told her about the hair clip I had borrowed at recess. I told her about the burgundy coat and my mother's quiet pride in choosing it. I told her about the designs I had drawn in my notebooks in high school. I told her about the long mirror in my bedroom in my parents' house, and the way I had stood in front of it in the cardigan and the green shirt and felt nothing wrong. I told her in bits, across months, never in any one conversation, and Sarah listened to each bit as if it were a small jewel that had been set down in front of her, and she never tried to put the jewels together faster than I was willing to put them together, and she never asked me to name what they were. She began, in her own quiet way, to make space for it. She did not announce this. She did not declare any new understanding. She put, one Saturday in June, a small folding screen in the corner of our bedroom, the kind of screen you put by a window to filter light, and she placed it in front of the chair where I sat on Sunday mornings. The screen was not opaque. It was a screen of thin slats that let the light through. But it gave me, when I sat in the chair, the feeling of a small room of my own in the middle of our shared room, and she did this without comment, and I noticed it the first time I sat down, and I did not say anything about it for 2 weeks, and then I said thank you, and she said she had thought it might be nice, and that was all. She began, in the same unobtrusive way, to put things on the shelves of my side of the closet. A second scarf, in a soft gray. A small ceramic jar of hand cream, whose scent she thought I would like. A sweater she had seen at the same shop, in a deep mustard, that she thought the color of would suit me. She did not present any of these things as gifts. She placed them on the shelf the way one places a folded napkin in a drawer for someone, and I would find them there, and I would feel each one like a small permission, like a small uncurling. My parents noticed something before they asked about it. My mother noticed that I seemed, on our Sunday lunches, more at ease in the chair I always sat in, and that the shirts I was wearing when she paid attention had softer colors than the ones I had worn before, and more interesting collars. She did not ask. My father noticed nothing. My father was, in those years, losing pieces of himself to a kind of quiet wearing down, and he was still affectionate, but he was watching the world from further away, and I was glad of it because I did not yet know how to tell him what to know. It was my mother who finally asked. She came to the house one afternoon in October, when Sarah was at work, and she sat with me in the kitchen, and she said gently, and without a single inflection I could have read as anything other than care, that she had begun to notice small things in how I dressed, and that she had been wondering whether there was anything she should understand, anything she had missed, anything I wanted her to know. I sat at the table. I did not know what to say. I told her there was nothing she had missed. I told her that some of it she had actually been the first to know, without her knowing, all those years ago in the yellow dress. She did not understand. I tried again. I told her that certain clothes had always felt more like me than other clothes, and that I had come to understand in the years since Sarah, that this was a part of who I was and not a phase. She listened. She did not interrupt. She took a small breath and she held it, and when she spoke she said that she had suspected something of this kind for a long time, and that she was sorry not to have been the one to bring it up, and that she loved me, and that nothing she had ever known about me had any bearing on whether she loved me. She did not have a vocabulary for it. She did not try to find one. She said she would like to know how she could be useful to me, and I said I did not know yet, and she said that was fine.